Welcome to my channel. Sit back and listen to the best true crime stories. Let's go. The strange disappearance and mysterious death of Polish 30-year-old construction worker Mateusz Kawecki in 2018, alas, did not resonate. The police and the public were not interested in this man. He was not famous, handsome, or rich. He was a simple man from a small village. When Mateusz disappeared, they hardly looked for him. And when his remains were found, the investigation was done with little more than a sleeve. This short essay is an attempt to remind us all, each of us is valuable and loved. The term is relatively recent, something like 13 or 14 years old. Missing white woman syndrome, have you heard of it? It appeared in 2005 in the media and some books after the sensational disappearance of Natalie Holloway on the island of Aruba. The term is believed to have been coined by the famous American journalist Gwen Ifill, who put into its meaning the excessive media and social media hype surrounding the disappearances of white women and girls from wealthy families. Men and women of other races, as well as people of both sexes from low-income families, do not receive as much public and media attention, and some researchers have even derived formulas for why this phenomenon occurs. In their opinion, the missing white woman syndrome is explained by the external attractiveness of the victim, as well as the interest of ordinary people in the lives of the rich, and the neglect of the lives of ugly people from the conventional ghetto, remote village, trailer town, or marginalized family. These formulas roughly look like this. 1. Disappearance plus the victim's physical attractiveness plus white skin color plus from a good family equals public and journalistic attention to the story of the disappearance. 2. Disappearance murder plus external unattractiveness of the victim plus victim from a poor or dysfunctional family plus different race equals public and media ignoring the story of the missing person. Sounds, you have to agree, despicable. It's as if society only values the good-looking and successful members of society, and those who don't have a good face and mind are not of much interest to mankind. I will not give my personal assessment of this phenomenon. I will only say that I agree that such a trend exists, and it disgusts me. Therefore, I will offer you a short, but incredibly strange and instructive story of the disappearance of an ordinary man. Not handsome or rich, an ordinary man, of which there are billions in the world. True, and information on this case will be, alas, a minimum. The disappearance of this man and the subsequent discovery of his remains in the press was covered very sparingly. It did not cause a stir, as well as fierce disputes and demands of citizens to investigate the case comprehensively. This is probably why the police treated it very negligently. I think it can hardly be called an investigation. The case was handled unprofessionally, and in the end it was hushed up, and a logical verdict was reached. Nothing was explained to the public, and it was put under wraps. I will describe it as much as I can dig up information. I am unlikely to answer additional questions. But I will say for sure, I do not want to be a participant of the missing white woman syndrome because I am convinced that every human life is equally valuable. You can consider Mateusz Kawecki's story as my tribute to his memory. To the memory of a simple, unremarkable man, but no less loved by his family and friends, and no less valuable to society than any of us. So, Poland, our not so distant foreign country, perceived by some as an inseparable part of Europe, and a country whose standard of living should be oriented to. Poland is praised for its roads, high wages, and economic growth. Many people from post-Soviet countries work and live in Poland. Poland gladly accepts everyone from Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, as long as you can work well. Nurses and doctors, builders and agrarians, crane operators, bricklayers, teachers and designers. There is a job for everyone here, legal or not so legal. Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians, according to polls, are little better than migrants from Yemen and Sudan. So now experts say that there are several million of our compatriots working in Poland. However, some would say that the current success of Poland is somewhat of a myth, because Poles themselves also massively prefer to leave their country to work in more successful European countries like Germany, Austria, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. Mateusz Kawecki, 30, belonged to just such a group of Poles. Coming from a tiny Polish village called Hutkow, for the spring of 2018 he had been living with his father for 5 years in Hanover, Germany, where they both worked as construction workers. Mateusz only came to his family in Poland for vacations and vacations. I do not know what exactly he did at the construction site. I can only assume that his income was small, for the young man's mother continued to live in a simple farmhouse in Chutkow. In another Polish village, Lipia Góra, lived Mateusz's fiancée, whom he had not promised to take permanently to Germany. Mateusz's fiancée, Zofia Quick, was in labor in March 2018. The time of the child's birth fell almost on Easter, and Mateusz legitimately decided to take a leave of absence from work to attend the birth of his firstborn and then visit his mother. On March 28, 2018, after a hard shift at work, around 11:30 p.m., Mateusz Kowecki got into his old blue 1998 BMW 525 with German license plates and headed towards Lipia Góra. He planned to drive all night, cover about 650 kilometers, and arrive at his destination by 8 to 9 a.m. on March 29. However, he never arrived in the morning. At 10:22 a.m. on March 29, he received a phone call from his father, who had stayed in Hanover. He was worried and wanted to find out where his son had disappeared to. Mateusz was on the line and told him that his journey had been delayed due to the closure of the A10 highway. There was a serious accident and a traffic collapse. Mateusz had to wait and detour, and by 11:30 in the morning he had only reached Szczecin, a city located in the northwest of Poland, not far from the German border. Mateusz still had about 215 kilometers to go to Lipia Góra. Mateusz assured me that he was fine and would probably be there in a couple of hours. Immediately after a short conversation with his father, he wrote the same thing in a text message to his fiancée. However, he never arrived, and the text message to Zofia was his last contact. Concerned about the absence of her beloved, after repeated unanswered calls, Zofia contacted Mateusz's sister Katarzyna Pieczkiewicz, who also lived in Hanover, at about 5 p.m. the same day. Now all his relatives started calling the missing man, but no one picked up the phone. 2 hours later, after unsuccessful attempts to contact her son, his mother Anna Kowecki went to the local police station to report him missing. She did not receive a report that day. According to the Polish police, too little time had passed to sound the alarm and consider Kowecki missing. They tried to reassure the man's mother, saying that there might have been a technical hitch on the road and that Mateusz would probably show up soon. However, the man was never seen alive again. For about half a year he was searched for, but slowly and reluctantly. No one knew exactly where Mateusz had disappeared, in Germany or Poland, which made it possible for the police in both countries to dump the responsibility for the search on each other. The German police refused to search for Kowecki, claiming that Mateusz was a Pole who had gone home and was lost somewhere in Poland. Appeals from the parents of the missing man were not accepted in Germany, saying the Polish police have been dealing with this case for a long time. Polish law enforcement officials were not persistent either, assuming either that Mateusz had not left Germany or that he was consciously trying to escape from his family. All this was complicated by the fact that the border between Poland and Germany is not equipped with any checkpoints. There are no passport and customs controls, and only a system of license plate reading. Therefore, it was very difficult to establish exactly whether Mateusz had entered Poland. All this territorial and bureaucratic bacchanalia led to the fact that nobody was really looking for Mateusz. Either the white missing woman syndrome kicked in and Mateusz was considered to have run away, or whether in this case both Polish and German police can be called brakowatelstwa, not willing to do their job properly. But the fact remains that even simple investigative measures to find the man were not wanted by the police in either of the two countries. In particular, the check of his cell phone was carried out only after Mateusz's parents had pestered the police. And even then, carried out is a strong word. The fact is that after the man's disappearance, his cell phone continued to receive calls for several days. Periodically, his relatives called him. At times, he was out of range. By tracking the cell phone, according to the relatives, it was possible to at least roughly understand Mateusz's movements and his last location. However, Polish detectives refused to make even such a small effort, arguing that it was impossible to check the billing of the German SIM card in Mateusz Kowecki's cell phone. According to the Polish police, Mateusz's cell phone did not connect to the network of Polish operators, and then it became unclear where the man was actually at the time of his conversation with his father on the morning of March 29th. Once again, the family of the missing construction worker had to travel to Germany to ask the German police to check the billing of Mateusz's phone. However, this also proved impossible. The German police did not want to do anything, claiming that the man had disappeared in Poland and that his Polish colleagues should be in charge of finding him. Tired of being kicked around by one side or the other, the Kowecki family started their own investigation and began to check how and where Mateusz could have been lost. The family put up flyers about his disappearance, drove on the roads, stopped at cafes, gas stations, and markets, showed photos, and tried to find out if anyone had seen him. But it was all in vain. Mateusz had an appearance too ordinary for Poles, and his car was a cheap old rust bucket. There was nothing to remember about the man's appearance, and no one was able to provide any information about him. As time passed, Mateusz's daughter, who was born on the 6th day of his disappearance, grew up without her father. Kowecki's mother, cousin, and siblings went on Polish television, crying into the camera, cursing the police, and begging for help in finding their son and brother. In desperation, they even turned to clairvoyants, who prophesied Mateusz's death in a traffic accident. One of them, Krzysztof Czachowski, a well-known psychic in Poland, told Mateusz's mother that between Myroslawiec and Walks on the road from Szczecin to Bydgoszcz there was a bridge over a swampy river. Allegedly, Mateusz failed to control his steering and went into the water, drowning with his car. Kowecki's family and the police searched all the turns, exits, and bridges on this road, but found no traces of braking, damaged barriers, or collapsed embankments that could indicate an accident there. It was as if Mateusz Kowecki had fallen through the ground, not alone, but together with the car. The second half of spring flew by like a day. The summer passed, and nothing was heard about Mateusz. And suddenly, on September 12, 2018, this story got a horrifying denouement. In Husko, a neighbor living next to Mateusz's mother's house came to visit her and complained about the disgusting smell coming from her shed. This nauseating stench had been plaguing him for the past few weeks. The wind was constantly blowing it around, and the neighbor decided that an animal had probably died in Kowecki's barn. It should have been found and buried immediately. However, the woman could not find the source of the stench, so she let the neighbor search the barn himself. All the nooks and crannies had been searched, but only the place under the roof, where the hay is dried, remained. Going up there together, the man and the woman first saw a knapsack lying on the floor, a bottle of bison, and 2 rope loops hanging from one of the beams. And underneath them was a pile of dirty old clothes that seemed to emit a foul stench. As they looked closer, they suddenly realized that they were looking at decayed human remains with the head detached from the body. And Mrs. Kowecki realized with horror that the rucksack and the clothes the corpse was wearing were exactly the same as Mateusz's. It was indeed the man who had been missing for 6 months, as DNA analysis soon confirmed. And how his remains ended up in his mother's barn, no one understood. After all, then, at the end of March 2018, he did not go to Husko. His route was Hanover, Lipia Gora. To Husko from Lipia Gora was still about 635 kilometers. These villages are in different parts of Poland, with Mateusz somehow ending up in his mother's barn and his car disappearing. No one in the tiny village, where everything is in plain sight, saw either the man's arrival or his car. But the Polish police didn't seem to care much. When they inspected the scene of the incident, they piled the items they found like junk into one blue bag. They didn't even follow the rudimentary rules of evidence collection. They mixed everything into one pile, as if they didn't realize that this is not the way to do it. When they saw 2 loops hanging from the beams, they immediately decided that it was suicide, and did not even give Mateusz's belongings for forensic examination. They explained the detachment of the head from the torso by rotting processes, and they said that Mateusz killed himself long ago, probably right after his disappearance. Most importantly, they did not even examine the barn itself, saying that there was no point in sifting through the hay, and if the relatives find something on their own, let them bring it to the police station. Detectives did not attempt to determine the exact date of Kowecki's death, and initially wrote it down in the paperwork as March 28, 2018. Only after the mother, father, and sister of the deceased started arguing with the investigator, proving to him that they were still talking to Mateusz on the 28th. The investigator corrected the date. Moreover, not on the one that logically should have been established by the expertise, but again, out of the blue, transferring it to March 30th. With the conclusion of suicide a couple of days after finding the remains, the village guards returned Mateusz's belongings to his relatives, right in the same bag, in one single pile. And 2 days later, Mateusz's father found his son's sneaker with his foot in the hay in the attic. And the question arises, how did the police carry out the identification and autopsy of the remains if they did not even notice the missing body parts? The clothes given away by the police raised many questions for Mateusz's family. First, it was incredibly dirty and workmanlike. The one he wore when he worked at the construction site. It was strange, as if a man, without changing his clothes, in a dirty and tattered sweater, pants, hat, jacket, and sneakers, jumped into a car right after work and went on a trip. No one does that, and he still had hundreds of kilometers to drive, and to appear to his fiancée. Anna Kawecki was surprised at this moment. Mateusz had always been neat and tidy, and strove to look good. She did not believe that he could have gone to his favorite girl's house for the holidays in such an unsightly state, without any unusual circumstances. To top it all off, those clothes were stained with blood. The reason for the blood was clearly not explained by the hanging. Even more questionable were the 2 teeth stuck to the dried blood stains on the man's sweater, and the almost empty bottle of Polish-made mineral water found in the attic, which contained many cigarette butts. Mateusz had never smoked and couldn't even stand the smell of tobacco smoke. He also hated orange juice, the empty packet of which was found in the attic. The Polish police did not even touch these items, so no one knows to this day what these cigarette butts and juice packets were, or whether they contained fingerprints and DNA of another person. Another oddity of the case is that Mateusz does not seem to have taken any spare clothes or personal belongings with him on the road. The found backpack was empty, and when Kawecki's father visited his son's rented apartment in Hanover, he found there a travel bag with things prepared for departure. However, why Mateusz did not take them with him on the road, and went in a dirty work outfit, remained unclear. However, the biggest mystery in this story is the missing car. It was never found. Nowhere, neither in Poland, nor in Germany, nor in any other country in Europe. Mateusz's BMW was never involved in an accident or re-registered. The car keys and documents for the car were also missing, although Mateusz's wallet with bank cards was in his backpack. The dead man's cell phone was also found. Unharmed, it had simply run out of battery. His call record didn't show anything extraordinary. No calls to or from other people's numbers, and the last call was made on March 30th to Mateusz's uncle, but it looked as if it had been made accidentally. It lasted less than a second. There was no connection with the caller, and the call was immediately terminated. Moreover, the attic where Kawecki's body was located was not a completely isolated part of the barn. Most of its half was clearly visible from below. Mateusz's relatives actively used the shed during spring and all summer, and none of them not only did not notice the body hanging from the beam, but also did not hear the smell of decomposition. It is also inexplicable that given the size of Hutkow, which has only about 20 houses, where everything is in plain sight and everyone can see who is walking through the village, nobody noticed Mateusz or anyone else driving through the village or hanging around the barn. Police assumed that Mateusz arrived in Chutkow from Warsaw by bus, as they found a ticket dated March 31st in his pants pocket. The Polish police, she said, had looked at traffic camera footage but had not seen Kawecki's car on any of the roads. Interviews with bus drivers also yielded nothing. None of them remembered Mateusz. But despite so many oddities and appeals of relatives to conduct a more thorough investigation, the state prosecutor of Zamość stated that the death of 30-year-old Kawecki was a suicide. He flatly refused to hold a second inquest, explaining that the police had already thoroughly checked all the circumstances of the case, questioned Mateusz's relatives and friends, and found no reason to doubt their conclusions. To this day, Kawecki's mysterious death has not been fully understood. The man did not seem to have any motive for suicide. According to his family, he was not poor, had no debts, and was not depressed. He had a job and a favorite girlfriend, and was about to give birth to a long-awaited child. Everyone knew that Mateusz was happy to become a father soon, was saving money, and was going to propose to his bride, celebrating a lavish wedding. And why would a young man have to go to a faraway land to hang himself in his mother's barn? To understand, Mateusz had to travel over 1,200 kilometers in a couple of days. It would be good if he did it by car, but his car disappeared. Then how did he travel such a long distance so quickly and sneak into his mother's barn unnoticed? And why would he do it to shock the person closest to him? On the other hand, if someone really killed Mateusz and then staged his suicide, how did he manage to remain unnoticed in a tiny village where any stranger is seen like a lone tree in the middle of a field? And what would be the purpose of a stranger's killer dragging a body to Mateusz's mother's plot? And how could he have known the address and dragged the body into the barn unnoticed? There are no answers to all these questions. And if you want to find additional information on the case, they arise even more. For example, why did Mateusz reach Szczecin only by half a morning on March 29th? At that time, he had been on the road for about 11 hours, which raises a legitimate question. Why did it take him so long to cover 650 kilometers? Do you remember that in a phone conversation with his father, Mateusz said something about the accident and the closure of the A10 road? By digging through the notes of German news outlets dating back to that day, I think I was able to find what kind of accident we might have been talking about. Indeed, on March 28th at about 13:30 on a section of the A10 road near the town of Oranienburg, the driver of a tanker truck carrying diesel fuel failed to control himself and crashed into a separating barrier. As a result of this accident, the driver of the tanker truck was killed and 4 people were injured. Due to the threat of diesel fuel ignition, the highway was closed for several hours. However, by evening the consequences of the accident were completely eliminated and the road was opened. Meanwhile, we know that Mateusz started his journey at 23:30 that day. By that time, the A10 highway was already operating normally, and Mateusz could have traveled on it without hindrance. Then why did he tell his father that it had delayed him? Probably, the man needed some more or less rational explanation for his delay, and he cited the accident. But then the questions arise. 1. What really delayed Mateusz on the road? 2. And why did he have to lie to his father? There is almost complete unanimity among Mateusz's relatives about the cause of his death. They believe that the young man was a victim of murder. But, as it always happens, in any team there is at least one person with a different opinion. In the case of Mateusz's relatives, this lousy sheep is his aunt Ursula Dabska. She claims that Zozia, Mateusz's fiancée, allegedly wanted to break up with him and return to her ex-boyfriend. This, in Ursula's opinion, was the reason for Kowecki's suicide. There is no confirmation of this. All relatives of Mateusz and Zozia's acquaintances call this information a vile lie. They claim that the girl loved Mateusz, suffered his death severely, and is still alone raising a child. As for Ursula Dabska, I have the impression that this woman is not mentally healthy. Her comments can be found in all news outlets and on social media pages that wrote about the Mateusz case. And they clearly show Ursula's fanatical obsession and mental instability, so I wouldn't take her word for it. In my opinion, this case probably could have been solved if not for the botched actions of the Polish police and the indifference of the German police. It seems that the mystery of Mateusz's death was indeed unsolved due to the missing white woman syndrome. There has been little written about the case, and a local news outlet ran 2 videos, one of which posed pointed questions to the local young prosecutor. He looked the journalist in the eye with a cheeky smile, and either did not answer uncomfortable questions or said offhandedly that he was satisfied with the investigation of the Mateusz case. With these few actions, the public's attention could not be aroused. The relatives of the deceased man, simple villagers, unable to fight bureaucracy and conduct an independent investigation, were left alone with their problem. They are still trying to find Mateusz's missing car on their own. No one wanted to help them financially, physically, or legally, and no additional money has been allocated from the Polish budget to investigate the death of their family member. This fact can be compared, for example, with the case of the disappearance of Madeleine McCain, for the search for whom more than £10 million was allocated. Unfortunately, this story shows that if God forbid any of us is in trouble, it is far from certain that anyone will come to our aid. What if we don't pass the face check for sufficient public interest in our person?